game of Newts? Do you think that'll draw some viewership?
It absolutely will.
Sucker did.
Welcome to Game of Newts, an podcast on something by validators, except for not me. I've got no idea what the intro is anymore.
Oh,
I used
as good as I could have done.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't even know what it was. That's why I was hoping you would do it.
When it was the long I can do the original one. Welcome to Game of Nodes, podcast on the Cosmos by independent validator teams.
Good.
When it was the long, complicated one, I could do that. Then it kind of just became we're a podcast. And I lost all track of what it is.
Well, I think it's just dropped the Cosmos bit, and it's exactly the same, right? Podcast by independent validator teams.
Fine.
Not that I'm throwing shade, since we volunteered you to say it.
I just find it odd as someone who's just independent and not a validator team to even be claiming it's from validator teams at this stage, seeing as I'm pretty much 50% of the phrase time, I would say now.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and our content doesn't exactly come from validators either. We're like, hey, what happened? That's interesting.
Exactly.
And then we talk about validator stuff, and people are like, can we not talk about validator stuff? Fine.
Well, that's mainly me complaining about Null when he starts talking about his nodes at the data center. I just kind of snooze for 20 minutes.
I know that was a shit show this week. I was hoping he was here so we could talk about it. It was like all the perfect data center stuff. Like he got in late and then it didn't ship, and then he planned his time, and then he was missing cables and he had to go to the store. Then he got on a plane and the guy said, "Oh yeah, it's ready to go. You ready?" And the guy's like, "No, I got on a plane." It was all perfect data center story stuff, which we'll have to hear about next year.
It makes me really excited that he's going through it for the first time so that I can watch and really double down on me not wanting to host my own metal. I'm perfectly happy with letting the experts deal with it and let the experts take care of the hardware replacements. We've had 6 hard drive replacements in the last 2 months. That's 6 times I didn't have to go to the data center this month. That's awesome. Exactly right. That makes me feel so good.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Or even if you have, you pay for it, but if there's a good team on some DCs, we're right in the conversation that Benny doesn't want to have. But even if we're in some good DCs, have really capable people on site that will get involved, right? And you send them new stuff and you just give them a window and they handle it, right? Or they'll do whatever. And other ones are like, listen, here's a key, you go over there. And if you want to do something, you have to have somebody come in and do it for you. And those are miserable. That's what we're in. And so everything is it depends on if one of us are out of town or that's going on or those types of things. It's just, it's brutal. You don't want that. You want just maybe send some hardware there, and if a drive fails, you have 6 more sitting in a case that the guy just can swap in when you talk to him, type of thing. You don't want to be in there.
It makes me kind of wonder about Artifact, since he hosts his stuff, but not locally. Is he paying someone to do replacements if that happens?
Yeah,
he is. Okay,
yeah.
Okay, because I know that he also hires his son to some extent, but that would be expensive flying them all over the world as he does.
Yeah, no, I think that's what you do. You get to deal with a DC that has really good remote hands, and then you just send them machines and you deal with that structure of it, and then you give them some spares, and they might even have logins in certain situations, which you may or may not want, because they might have to do something on the OS or maybe something in IPMI to change something. So those are things you don't want to have, but you might have to depending on what's going on, right? So, but yeah, it's brutal.
There's something kind of romantic about owning your hardware to me, but the reality, it's one of those things where I really have to let the reality sink in over and over. I have to be reminded yearly, because yearly or every 6 months, someone talks to me is like, "Hey, have you thought about this?" And I'm like, "I love the idea. I love it." And then I have to go talk to John about him doing Proxmox or whatever. And then I remember, "Oh yeah, no, I hate this idea. No, I'm out."
Well, it's nice. So we have a couple glamour shots. I have some more glamour shots coming of our stuff too, because those are nice to be able to show and it looks good, right? It's kind of it's a little bit of a penis measuring thing, to be honest. Unfortunately, because it's you got a stack and there's LED lights on it and shit, which is cool, and maybe sometimes that works, but if you're in that business and you look at a stack of hardware and you see no battery backup units and you see no switches and you see like no all this type of stuff, what you actually see is like just hardware racked, and then you look at it and all I see is like problems. Like I just, like how much redundancy is in there, and like what's the fiber look like, and who has control of those routes, and what's the failover on the switch that's sitting at the top of the rack, and then like what does the BGP routes go for, and like you start getting these types of things where you just depress yourself. You're like, ugh, I don't want to deal with this shit.
Yeah, exactly. This is the kind of conversation that reminds me that I have so little interest in the reality of running, operating.
It looks
hardware
good.
That,
yes. Yeah. It looks good. But right, Bendy? Is that this is what you're really excited about?
That, I mean, yeah, sure. Like,
yeah.
When I'm picking my validator, I just want.
Perfect. See.
That was the perfect
twinkly lights. Have a bare metal validator. You know.
You cut out there for a second, but you like twinkly lights. I'm guessing that's what you like. You want to see some. You want to see some sexy flashing LEDs.
That's what will seduce me to delegate. Nothing else. Just
perfect.
What about when you get really professional and you put a sticker of the logo of the network on the machine? That's how you know you've truly made it as a validator, when you can do that.
It's true.
Well, I assume that's what gets you a foundation delegation, right? Like that's how you get a foundation delegation.
I think that's that's one step above tattoo, right?
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. So tattoo is like where foundation delegation goes in, and then hardware
sticker on hardware is one clearly more commitment than tattoo. It's clearly what's going on.
Yeah.
I've not got access to the spreadsheets. I don't know what the topics are meant to be. So
I mean, it doesn't really matter.
No, that's good. I'll just carry on drinking then, and you can talk about hardware if you really want to, and I'll wonder why I'm here.
I don't. So what is happening this week? Penny, what have you getting?
I'm basking the Levana thing right now. If we want to start talking about that, I find that utterly fascinating. How Levana. So Levana has been like the most touted native airdrop, Cosmos airdrop launch in the last 6 months. And the fact that it like pumped and then the market makers immediately tanked it is just absolutely outrageous to me. But Ben, you probably know more about that than I do.
Well, I think you've pretty much described it. So it launches, I think you could buy it at about 60 cents or something pretty much immediately, and then it went up to over $1.50. And then it listed on GMEC, I want to say it was something like that, and then basically the market maker with a sledgehammer fist.
Oh, pausing up.
Decided to close the
You're breaking up, dude.
Gap between like 170 and 30 cents, and incentives there. And Sonny himself was tweeting about it and all sorts of stuff. So pretty rough. But I think the whole sequencing is weird. Certainly if you compare it to like what Tier did. Tier obviously have market makers doing stuff for them. That seems pretty straight obvious.
Bendy, I wonder if you should turn your video camera off to like spare some of the bandwidth, because you're cutting out pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. It might be a good idea.
We're doing that, whereas I
think that's probably the issue. So catching up on that. So it started like here, I'll mute them out. So it started like 60 cents, right? Like it started at like 60 cents or something similar to that, right? And then you said it was pumping up to like $1.50, because I only saw it when it actually hit CoinGecko. CoinGecko, I think, didn't get listed till after launch, right? It was like, I think it started like 80 cents or something, because I think it was on the way down, because you said it was already in the over $1 or something similar.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it went up quite a bit. So if I remember correctly, it launched at 50 or 60 cents. And then due to the hype, due to the excitement, it pushed all the way up to like $1.50, $2.
Yeah. Oh, really?
And
Jeez.
then, yeah. And then suddenly it didn't. Like the day candle or the 15-minute candle is like, it suddenly goes from that number to like 40 cents or 50 cents in one fell swoop.
Right now it's listed, I think it's 32 right now. It's down 64% in 24 hours.
Ooh, it's listed at 32 cents right now?
32 right now on at least on CoinGecko, it's where it's showing.
Wow.
So 32.9, actually 33. So yeah, it looks like it was pretty brutal. I mean, but what I don't understand is why would market makers be forcing down? Like what do you know what actions they're taking that would force this amount? I thought usually they were there to be able to obviously prop up through actions, not necessarily take profits.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was an ARB situation gone wrong, right? The discrepancy between $1.70 and somewhere else. I think Osmosis it was like $1.70, and then on a different exchange, a different centralized exchange where it launched at the same time was like 30 or 40 cents. And so rather than trying to like equalize them, they decided that the 30 cents or whatever it was the correct number, and then did a single sell to try and drive it all the way down to the other side, right?
Right.
Which is like, that's something I would pull as like not a market maker expert. I'd be like, I don't know, let's just like do a big
like
yeah.
Seems like time's right. I don't know. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, oh shit.
But I'm also not an expert. People don't pay me to market make, right? They pay me to run servers.
That's so
like even me, I don't think that I would see, the slippage at like 80% and I would be like, I should probably not make this move right now.
Like, you don't necessarily need to be an expert to recognize to not hit the button.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Bendy's back. Much more festive situation. Still no lampshades. Better Wi-Fi signal.
Yeah. Hopefully. So we'll see. I mean, I probably need more blinking lights on my hardware. Otherwise, how will my connection last, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's not too much of a lag actually between your lips and your sound. That's good. Yeah. So that's a hell of a. I mean, it really sucks for a team like that too. Like, they've been working so hard on that, and then say it went through a similar situation, right? When the tokenomics came out, like right at launch. Like, I guess every new chain has it never starts 100% positively, right? But shit like this always like leaves that's such a bad taste in people's mouths where they kind of then you start questioning the whole situation, right?
Yeah, and I think Levana obviously has a slightly troubled history dating back to their NFT collection that essentially was considered at the time to be a bit of a rug. Turns out obviously not to be, and you got a bit of an airdrop in exchange for that early support and stuff. But it's a really good product, but absolutely terrible launch. And ultimately, I'm probably bullish on the token because I think that the protocol actually makes revenue, and it hasn't really, it's not been live very long. But would I buy anything right now? We don't give financial advice on this podcast, so I'm not going to say.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting thing, right? Is that if you kind of look at it from a more holistic perspective. So the originally it was the dev wallet, I think, was accused of selling, if I remember correctly. And that's where the Twitter was really focused on. But if you kind of look at it from the dev's perspective, they make something like $50,000 per week in trading fees. I think $50,000 per week or per day. It's some pretty decent number, honestly. And so to drop the market,
I think it's weak.
Okay, so to drop the market so drastically for a $400,000 profit, it would just be insane, right? So I don't know. I feel bad for the devs as well. Like that. Assuming it wasn't them, I don't think that we do know that it was the market maker that caused it to happen versus the dev wallet.
Levana have said it was a market maker. And Levana gave the market maker the tokens. That's why it looks like a Levana Foundation wallet. I guess because basically it is, but they've given that to the market maker. The market maker's off doing whatever they're kind of instructed to do, I guess, which is, I assume that it looks like they're targeting 30 cents as they're kind of like, this is roughly what we think the price of Levana should be. I don't know enough about how people do token launches well, but the whole sequencing of this and the way it's been done, and Levana, there was a lot of stuff they didn't do brilliantly. Like they didn't publish breakdowns on how the airdrop worked. So like some people are saying, I did do trading and I did register and you've not given me an airdrop. And people don't really know why, because they don't know how much volume they were meant to have done.
Yeah.
And, like I got the airdrop because I've been doing some leverage trading, which which I did to get the airdrop, right? So that as a piece of marketing, it's worked and I've used the protocol and it's really good. But like, I think in the end, I've done like, because it's all leveraged, right? But like 90,000 or something like that in terms of volume.
Yeah.
Which seems like a lot of money to me, but I wouldn't know whether I just scraped in or was like way over the threshold. And if you don't tell people that kind of stuff, I can understand why people get frustrated. But equally, if you tell everyone, then they can just
right, like some sort of guidance, right?
If you tell everyone, then they can game it, right? That's the problem.
Right.
But I think you should tell it, at least when you make the airdrop, you should say what the criteria was. So even if it's retrospective, so that you can at least go, oh, I missed out by 5 cents or whatever it is.
Right.
I don't know. I think the concept of airdrops are so fascinating. I almost don't think that there should be any announcement. There shouldn't be an explanation of where it came from. Part of the point of an airdrop, my understanding is, for proof of stake chains, is to get liquidity away so that the SEC has less of a claim, or some entity has less of a claim of it being a security, right? Like you're trying to distribute it that way, the market can kind of make itself. And so, are people entitled to an answer for where this airdrop came from? That they were like, why should they justify every single ounce of support for like the airdrop that they gave?
I think it's useful for community building. I think I suppose that's the problem, though, is cultures start to build up. So we're used to transparency about what these things are, so people expect it. And then if you don't do it, the team gets shit. But I think it's interesting because there's no actual reason. Like Levana isn't a proof of stake token, right? It's just a token. Doesn't do right. It literally does nothing right now. It is just as much use as Cerberus or Puppy or Newt, all of which are,
Hold on now. You can't be throwing shade at Newt right now, all right? I have a financially vested interest in the success of Newt. So you can hold off on that.
I mean, I love Newt too, but what I'm saying is Levana is just a meme coin right now. It doesn't secure a chain. It doesn't give you revenue. You can't vote. It gives you nothing. There's the future possibility of governance and other stuff after that. But Newt's going to do far more than that. It's going to secure the hub, as far as I can tell.
Is that the next step?
So I thought that Levana actually was going to do revenue sharing in it. If not, then I guess kind of what's
well, I think that's what they're saying they're going to do, but they aren't. Like, there's nowhere for me to state right now, unless I've missed it. There's nowhere for me to stake my Levana to earn revenue. And there's no governance that's going to enforce that. So, like when Stride launched, if you remember, everyone was shitty about it because it's just another farming token. Everyone's just going to dump it, And actually, what happened is governance passed a proposal that went, see that money that goes to the foundation? Just could you direct that over to stakers. And that's what happened, because that was governance, right? But if you don't turn governance on, the community can't take the money away from your foundation, and you can keep telling them that you're going to give them revenue in the future. It's a cunning plan. Look, I'm fudding a bit there, but like, they haven't worked it out yet. That seemed quite clear from the spaces I listened to. They don't know what they're doing in the like immediate steps. They have a plan, but they haven't worked out what the steps to that dance are yet.
I mean, that's the way to do it, right? Like that was the entire NFT craze of 2021, is you say, hey, we're going to mint these NFTs, and in these NFTs, you're going to play games with them. You are going to look at them in the metaverse, but listen, you can't do that right now. This is like 6 years down the line. Just mint the next NFT series that comes out next. And then once that happens, okay, we'll just mint the next one. That seems a bit funny as well. I'm not that quite that jaded. I'm just drawing parallels.
The thing here is that what I suppose I am saying is, don't buy Levana, buy Newt, because Lavender 5's future hinges on it. And from my point of view, as I delegate a lot of stuff to Lavender 5, I want them to have more twinkly lights on their hardware.
Full circle, baby. All comes back around to more twinkly lights on the hardware. That means more Newt. Yes.
It's called Game of Newt for a reason.
That's right.
But I think it's interesting, actually, because Newt got a lot of FUD for launching in the way that it did, which was there's just a load of Newt in an LP. Mm-hmm. No airdrop, no nothing. Just buy it if you like it. And obviously that's really different from the way that the majority of tokens in Cosmos are distributed. And so golden ratio staking is getting a load of abuse for being a whale who's going to dump on everyone and, rug them for however much their stack of Newt is worth. Mm-hmm. And this was one of the things they published a rich list of all the big wallets that had all of these huge numbers of tokens, but they included things like the tokens that are in the LP and the tokens that are in the IBC addresses, because the people posting the list haven't got a clue what that list actually means. So they've just posted a list of stuff and gone, ugh! It's my favorite kind of FUD, is the FUD with zero evidence. It's the same as the people saying that it was the Levana Foundation. Like 5 minutes research is before you post that solves that problem for you.
I saw that complaint as well with Newt, that it had no airdrop. It was just stick in the LP and then who wants to buy it. I like it. I'm fond of that. I think that's awesome. Now, I think the big downside of that, of course, is that, whoever makes it is going to go, oh, I put it in the LP and then I bought $1,000 worth. And that $1,000, because it was worth basically nothing originally, now you have like 10 million coins or whatever, right? That's lame. But otherwise, this kind of turns it into an organic price discovery.
Well, I think also again, it's, but I think the person, as far as I understand it, I think it was $8,000 worth of Atom or something. They burnt their LP shares, right? So that person's already invested an amount of money. I don't see why they shouldn't see some upside on that. I think the challenge with a lot of this is about, are you, as the person that creates that meme coin, and the people that get in early and the community as a whole, able to have fun and not rug your fun? Because you can do it, and people did this on Algorand because during the bull run, there was this really easy UI that allowed you to mint a shitcoin, distribute it, set up an LP, do all this stuff, and it was like 5 button clicks. It was brilliant, but essentially it was just a way for people with the best shitcoin name and a bit of liquidity to make real tokens off their shitcoin. Excellent thing. And I guess the project that had the minty button probably made a bit of money off that. But if you actually want this to be a fun thing, then you're not, even if you get in early, you're not going to just dump on the community, because otherwise the fun thing is over. And I think that's what's been interesting for me is the fact that the idea that you could have fun and make profit in Cosmos seemed to bring a lot of new users and volume to Astroport to the point where it needed more blinky lights on its hardware, right?
It certainly has needed a lot of blinky lights on its hardware. Yeah. Yeah, I know.
I kind of feel bad.
For what? No, go ahead.
Honestly, I kind of feel bad because I was in the Newt Telegram pretty early on, and I was throwing them shade because they were like going down. I was like, listen, I've got all these nodes backed up. Just point it at my hardware for a while, and like it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And so for a couple of days, they were like, no, we got this bolted down. We're good. But yeah, I threw them quite a bit of shade for that. Like I have nodes. I've got an array of nodes that you can point at. It'll work fine. You don't need to use public stuff. But not better. I'm just go ahead.
I guess they were. I think they were using. They had their own nodes initially, and then in the bear, like it was expensive nodes, right? So I understand that they wanted to go public, or at least, I think it was probably a mix of different types of node structures that were supplying that data. But just recently, so we took over some Astroport traffic this week, and even in the last like literally the last 2 days is really what it started. But yesterday and the 18th, I guess was Monday night. So Monday night, like even on Injective, they were doing a lot of catch up because the indexers were catching up and things like that. And like we were still getting 2,000 to 4,000 requests a second on Injective, and another 600 or 700 on different chains. And then today, which was fine, like everything was great, like things were catching up. And then Say had some. Is there some meme stuff going on in Say today too, or yesterday?
Say has inscriptions right now going on.
Oh, I thought there was something else. I think there was something else on Astroport too with Say, because we
I don't know.
We provide some endpoints there, and then there was a huge amount of Say traffic for a little bit too. And then today on Astroport, we we started to feel the real wrath of shitcoins. So like on Injective, it went from, which was totally fine, like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 a second, and we had a couple spikes of 8,000 and 11,000 transactions a second, or 11,000 requests a second. And Injective does not do well with that. So with a small handful of nodes at 11,000, like they were struggling. So we set up another one today, and then I guess it was also a significant amount of requests coming from a specific region. And so the Astroport teams put a little bit of brakes on a specific region that was like overly doing requests. And so that really helped out. And so now we're sitting right here, actually, as we're talking, it's at 7,800 a second. And I have some brakes built in the back end to like, just so at the point where the node doesn't shit the bed. Which it was like, it would just give it up. I mean, that too, right? It would just stop responding. It would just sit there, and it wouldn't move the blocks any forward. It wouldn't respond to anything. It wouldn't even say that it wasn't syncing anymore. It would just like, and so yeah, so that was fun. So that was kind of a firefight this morning, because I was restarting nodes like crazy, trying to get them to stay at least close to the head. And we had a couple times when all of them were down at the same time for like 30 seconds. So it was ugly for a couple times today, but now it's actually starting to lay down. And then it also, I think the other thing I know that team's working on is that right now it's not a very efficient site. Like there's a lot of requests per page view where there's a lot of things there to like move that away from straight RPC calls and send over gRPC, which is obviously a little bit less taxing and less open ports and that kind of stuff, and or open connections, and I think just the efficiency of using indexes more for when you can use those types of things, and what can come out of the back end versus what comes out of the client. So yeah. So anyway, 11,000 Injective RPC requests a second is just too much. Like it's just like you can't have that's like 5 or 6 nodes to actually make that thing deal with it, and that's just too much.
So if the actual bull market came back, tomorrow, how screwed would all of Cosmos's infrastructure be? Because I assume everyone has scaled down, right? Like what you're describing with Astroport. They've scaled down for the bear, save money, very sensible. If everyone suddenly went, wow, this is shit, and we saw the meme coin season ×3 happening, how screwed would we be?
I mean, I don't know. Schultz can this too. I think you'd have some not great user experiences for a short period of time, and how fast those teams react to that and understand it. I think you can solve that problem pretty quick. Like this stuff today, I mean, this injective stuff, I mean, it's ugly this morning, but that was for a reason that I think is very solvable. And trying to separate what's good traffic from bad traffic, I think also helps. So I think the other piece, we were talking about this with it's not only just that, but it's also like liquidity makes a big deal here too. Cause like that Stargaze stuff that was going on with people buying bad kids. I think you probably saw a bunch of stories on Twitter this week, and that wasn't infrastructure based. That was purely like, I transferred in this much ETH and we had a huge amount of slippage or something else happened because there was enough liquidity in the pools. Like all those types of things kind of happen too, right? So I don't know. It depends on. Also, I think some of the stuff. The other thing is like each of these sites, I think, is quite different in terms of efficiency, right? And not it's just because it was 11,000 RPC requests to Injective today doesn't necessarily mean that's probably only 500-600 concurrent users. So at 500 users, it's not a big deal, right? And so this is just this is just a blockchain's a really inefficient database, and it's a poor solution for these types of things. And so there has to be a balance of like showing data that's slightly old because it's indexed and cached versus literally hitting hundreds of contracts 43 times in every single every single page view, right? Like it's just not. There has to be a balance between those, and some of that data has to be real time, and I get that. But some of that stuff, like there has to be better solutions for that, right? Or smarter architectures for that.
Yeah. To answer your question a little bit as well around what it'll look like for people that if the node hardware can't keep up, Secret I think is a really good example of this. Secret, I think, was really set up to be very successful early on. And what ended up happening was NFTs started to become big, and secret NFTs are actually really cool because there's all sorts of metadata and stuff you can hide, because they're all encrypted and everything. So you can choose what's available to see and what's not. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. So when these mints started happening, all minting was happening behind 5 nodes provided by a node provider, and it would go down inevitably in just like a minute, and then it would take them 12, 16, 20 hours to get it back up, and then immediately go down again. And so if I remember early on, there were tens of thousands of users or secret in 2021, and after every single NFT mint, you would see just a colossal drop off of users because they'd be like, hey, I got on this, I'm all excited about this mint, and I can't actually do it because the infrastructure is too bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it was unfortunate because the provider that was giving the nodes or was being paid for the nodes, they just wouldn't scale up. They were kind of unresponsive, and that's just not going to happen if one of our teams that are actually like supporting hardware is involved, right? Like if I start seeing a bunch of 503s pop up, even though the person that I'm providing nodes for might not be paying more, like I'm going to do something to at least make it more efficient and make it work. Like I'm trying to provide a good product. This sounds like I'm kind of throwing some shade at the provider that was doing it, and I kind of am, but I'm not going to name names. But it's a great example of what will happen if we don't.
I would much prefer it if you did name names. I think this is, let's have a culture of transparency for people that do a shitty job, because the problem is that, and this is the thing, right? For you, this is a professional thing. You don't want to throw shade at people, fair. But for me, I remember Secret is so shit it can't mint NFTs. And that damages everyone. That damages every project on Secret. It damages every token holder on Secret. And that's because someone's running 5 nodes they can't be bothered to upgrade. And I think
after getting paid $100,000.
And this is the thing where, like, I'm not huge for professionally flaming people, but I also think that is this, like, if you are in a position of responsibility, then you have to deal with the consequences of when you are in dereliction of your duty. And I think that that's probably unfair to then just say that you as a competitor should out them. But I think that's a space where the foundation, the protocol, whoever it is, needs to step up and actually say, this supplier has let us down. And I think that's very difficult. And I've been in that position in the real world off chain, but in that position, ultimately, that's relatively private. The problem on blockchains is, as I say, every single person that has a secret token suffers because that person or that company isn't doing a good job as a provider. So I used to work in concerts and ticketing and that kind of stuff. And obviously, as you know, you'll have all tried to buy tickets to gigs where the website crashes, right? You know, that's completely normal, but like, there's only so much you can scale up your website to cope with Taylor Swift for about an hour, and the rest of the time you don't need it. So that's really awkward, and you have frank and open conversations, but ultimately you don't throw anyone on the bus under the bus afterwards because you all know it's hard. Like, that's fair, but there's no long-term damage. Or if there is, that's when you do start to see the names of the companies involved, because an artist like Taylor Swift, like the incident that happened with Ticketmaster, she does not want that reputational damage coming on her. So artist management speak to the promoters speak to all the ticketing providers, and they just throw them under the bus. And that's kind of the price you pay, right? But I think
sorry, go ahead. To add what you're saying, I'll definitely give. Okay, I'll give Kepler some props here, because early on, I don't think most people understood kind of how Kepler worked. Kepler is an interface basically for the RPCs, right? That's all it is. It's a wallet. And people understand that, but a lot of people kind of think that, or I would say that most people think that Kepler, for secret, they thought that Kepler was running the nodes, and so Kepler got so much flack for whenever the nodes would go out of sync, right? And they were always very gracious about it, like, hey, they never named names, even though like I checked their GitHub and like I could see that they knew who it was and everything. I don't know. So I guess it's an example of Kepler was always very gracious about like things going down. They're like, hey, it's out of our control. But then as far as more, they never named names.
And I think there's a balance, right? Like, you have to be professional, but I think the example you're talking about where it starts to damage the reputation of a whole load of associated stuff is much harder. And I think it's really difficult if you're a L1. So if the poor performance of Astroport starts to damage people's perception of Neutron, as Neutron, would you start to be like, that's concerning for you, right? You can't control what RPCs these guys are, what nodes these guys are using, what they're connecting to, and who they're being supplied by. But it's having brand damage to you. And I think that's one of the really interesting structural challenges of blockchains compared to what I'm describing in the kind of Web 2 world, where it's just like, well, I employ these people, they employ their subcontractors, and that's it. Like, that isn't kind of how we work. The reputational damage can spread out quite quickly to all sorts of other things. Slippage on stars is too high, Cosmos is shit.
Mm-hmm. While we're talking, we're back up to 11,000 transactions a second, requests a second. So I'm just watching these nodes. They're holding on though, doing a little bit of secret shit. I'm just queuing requests is all I'm doing, which I think is the best I can do. Is just when that request comes in from the client, just hold on to it until there's an open slot, and then be able to pass that along to a backend. Because the whole goal in these nodes are not, I don't think they're really architected for really high RPC usage. Like I could think we probably say the same thing on any web or any blockchain node. I can't think of I don't even know, Schultz, if you can think of one. I can't think of one that like is architected around as like a web server handling 20,000 requests a second, right? Like that doesn't exist.
You know that I'm going to take any opportunity I can be an absolute stand for Near. Near did inscriptions recently. We
Yeah.
didn't even realize because they handle it so well.
Mm.
So they had an insane amount of transactions running for like 3 days straight. Didn't even realize.
I mean, I think
because of how-
that's pretty good because we saw it on Aptos like that same thing, right? Because even we saw the full nodes struggling with the amount of API calls, and those were wasn't that much. It was like a couple hundred a second coming in each node, right? And it was struggling.
Mhm.
Although I'm not sure if that much of it was API based, but right now, like other things we've seen, unlike Stargaze, we've seen more. But I think block time has a big thing to do too. I saw Reese comment in the structure around caching the request. It's some of these are just not cacheable. I mean, you have a blockchain with 600 millisecond block times that are calling WASM contract calls. Like that is a very difficult response to be able to cache in any sort of realistic perspective, especially since you have a wide variety of contract calls that are happening. And I don't have the metrics in terms of what that repeatability is in there. And there might be some in there, but it's not massive. So I think, caching this and what we've been told is like that data needs to be 100% up to date on the latest block, which again, we can make a decision on how much that really needs to have happen, or if that can be cached for 10 seconds or something similar to that. It's very easy to be able to do. But up to this point, we haven't. So I think that might be working with that team to architect what's kind of next, but whether that's front end or whether that's back end. I would rather have it be front end, to be honest.
I would push back a little bit there. I think there's quite a bit that could be cached. So I don't know what Astroport is using, but I know that the Python API, anything you do has, I think, 4 or 5 transactions with it. And the first 2 are always exactly the same. The first one's always, it checks the status of the node, and then there's something else. And those are things that I think probably should be cached. Like if it's on a per block basis, thousands of people, then it's like, if it's just checking the status endpoint, then who cares? Like, it probably doesn't actually mean anything, right? Yeah. So that would be 20% kicked off right off the top. I don't know. Not that I'm pushing back and saying you're wrong, just that I think that there is a lot cached because there's a lot of inefficiencies. Because I got kind of deep into this early on whenever I started writing the backend for Lavender 5, and I was like, how am I rate limiting myself? And I looked into it and I was like, okay, because this doesn't make any sense. That's why. All right, got it. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, none of these are like status hits. There's none of that. None of that's in here. This is all contract balances.
Okay, interesting. That's quite different. Then.
Yeah,
they're probably using Cosm.js or something, which is more efficient. Cosm Pi, not to throw too much shade at it, it's simply not used as frequently, and so it doesn't have the same resources.
Yeah. It's a good question. So, anyway, I think now that these numbers are not going down, and maybe they will over time. And actually, everything here is holding on. Like, it's not that big of a. I mean, it's not awful. It's just I think the binary, just depending on what's actually being pulled, you can kind of see some of these nodes struggling after a period of time when they're just under that amount of stress for that long, with those maybe more complicated calls that are coming in. So I think right now it's a little bit brute force, and I think over time it'll get better.
It seems like there is something of an inverse correlation of block speed to how much each actual node can handle. Like, say, it doesn't seem like it can handle a lot of input per node from what I could tell. Like, it does great, it goes fast and everything, but it seems like Stargaze handles node attention better than Say nodes do, if that makes sense. They require more requests per second for Stargaze than it does for Say.
I think it might be inverse to block time a little bit.
So like it takes longer to process, or because it's expected to take less time to process it,
or more blocks. I mean, it's not like it has it's not a snapshot of the whole chain in time, right? Or maybe more blocks to be able to create the output, or I don't know exactly how that is, but it seems like they're somehow related there. Or maybe the nodes is too busy dealing with P2P and all this other shit, right? And then it has time for in terms of producing the result that's required. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, over time, faster block time and does seem to limit the pure number. Although in Say, actually, these numbers are higher than Say, so I can't really talk about it. Say, I think we usually structure like 2,000 or 3,000 a second, which is still, I mean, honestly, it's a decent amount of traffic. Like it's a lot of data. So right now I'm just taking a look and see, as long as the nodes are staying active, which they are, they're right at the top within. I mean, I'm just watching the head here, and they're all within 2 blocks, and I'm updating every 2 seconds, so it seems like they're fine. And I am stalling some requests out. So I basically limit how many connections per node concurrently, and then depending on, it's weird because it's like 400 connections per node. It can't have more than 400 actual TCP connections per node. Actually, times 2, it's 800 per node. And that equates to about 2,000 to 3,000 requests a second, because the requests are obviously.
Why is it times 2?
I'm sorry, because I have 2 balancers. Sorry.
Got
I'm
it.
limiting on
Okay.
each
I was
balancer.
like,
So yeah. Sorry.
got it.
It's a little inside baseball there. Yeah, sorry. 2 balancers. So each of those is cut in half. So yes, that's right. Sorry about that. Yeah.
I have 100% glazed over at this point. Like,
sorry.
You can no. This is why me coming on a validators podcast is no use, because like I know all the other stuff, but the actual bits of like how the blinky lights work is gobbledygook to me. But I'm sure if Frey and Null were here, they would be very excited.
Just think of a really inefficient global database with like tons of issues. That's
sounds like
mutable.
Sounds like
that can't be changed.
Sounds like the future of finance.
That can be changed. That requires a lot more power, like nodes everywhere.
And it's significantly slower.
Significantly slower.
And actually
dirty
has
secret for a lot of
load
these
of trust assumptions.
Yeah, the dirty secret for a lot of these is a lot of these apps will be running with like Postgres in the background. It's like, shh, don't say anything. So like if you hear like someone's using an indexer, yeah, they're probably using Postgres or something back there, which is an actual reasonable database rather than. I mean, that's what I'm doing. That's what I do with my backend. Is I consume the database and then I put it into Postgres so I can consume it faster.
That's right. That's what indexes are. That's what they are. I mean, honestly, like if you actually think of the actual web hits here, like these numbers are nothing. Like these are nothing, right? But the amount of power that requires to actually get that data to return it compared to other methods is, whatever. But it is, it's on chain. It's right there. It's just a matter of, I guess it goes back to the UI and back to the front end. Like it's not just, it has to be more than just throwing requests at a back end. Like it has to be some engineering there and trying to really identify what's important, what's not. Which going back to Stargaze, not to keep bringing them up, but like kudos to that team, because like Jorge and that team, they have done so much work over the time we've been working together the last 3 years that the number of requests that even our nodes see, like we've continued to remove nodes from the balancers because it is so efficient that it requires less and less hardware to be able to keep that site humming. And that's really a testament to them, right?
Stargaze strikes me as like, when I asked the question about like how bad will it be when the bull market comes in terms of infrastructure, Stargaze strikes me as an outsider. Like, yeah, I remember like it occasionally had issues, but for the most part, like super popular mint, fine, not a problem, can cope. The problems for Stargaze are all around liquidity, right? So,
yes,
I was listening to a friend of the podcast, Rama, he's got a prop up or coming on chain very soon for this liquidity DAO for Stargaze, where they're going to take some of the community pool and use it as kind of protocol owned liquidity to deepen the pools on various chains. And that seems like more of an issue for how Stargaze will perform in the bull than actually how the tech will hold up. The tech seems very robust, but I was talking to him about when after the filter minted, I think they sort of went, oh, the mint price will be like $30 or something. And probably by the time the mint rolled round, the mint price was like $45. And that's one of those things where people are excited, they're buying the token price is going up. Token price comes straight back down after the mint, right? Because everyone's selling.
Right.
And there's not a lot of reason to hold stars other than in those moments.
Right.
But it shouldn't be that one collection moves the price that much that a team can't plan what price they want to launch at it roughly. Obviously things fluctuate, but for it to go up 50% or something like that, it's not helpful to the team when they're trying to plan. So I think like actually tech wise, it looks like Stars has no obvious, like it's held up to anything that's been popular.
Yeah. Yeah, it's done pretty well. Like I think again back to that team, like our weekly months jumped to only about maybe 2 or 3,000 requests a second, which is not that big of a deal. And then just recently we brought all the image manipulation in house, which has been really cool. So they used to use a third party site for that would pull data out of like IPFS and then it would restructure that for different sizes. But that's now internally within our infrastructure, which is really cool.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we pulled all that in. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's using so if there's like so if you actually go to the site and bring up any collection, and you'll see some images that like fuzzy load. That's all Vercel doing that. But those images are being served off of the Stargaze array, the array that we built. And then those get cached within Cloudflare and distributed globally and those types of things. So it's
that's
something
Stargaze.zone in case anyone is listening.
That's right. Exactly. If you haven't yet minted something. So that's really good to be in sight. So really like right now, there's no part of this infrastructure, I think, that's not within the team, including the indexers, obviously constellations through Penso, all the images, IPFS, all the RPC, and everything else is all internally. And then obviously with all the stuff going on with swaps and all that other kind of things, those services keep growing, right? And that's all using the same kind of baseline. So I would agree with you. Like that infrastructure that team has built has been awesome. Like it's just a really well engineered thing. And I think the site is actually really fast. It's very responsive. The images are very responsive now. Where in the past those things took a little bit longer. Everything's edge, like it's all cached locally, and there's a lot of data on this site too. Like if you look at it, there's just like you go to like a collection page, there's like a shitload of data, right? You have all these prices and when it was listed and when it listed for, and like all the filter on the metadata on the images themselves. There's just a shitload there. So that's all the front end team doing all that work, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So I don't know.
The Stargaze conversations, again, circling back around to Secret just for a little bit. The conversation around Stargaze, I think, is really interesting because I'm going to post a link to Stash in the chat. Stash was Secret's big NFT playground, right? And It has a lot of really cool features. And by rights, Secret should have just skyrocketed with how cool this site, less so now, was. Like now they require email to sign up and a couple other things. And so I understand why they would do that, but this is a great example of coming full circle of Stargaze has always operated really well. I'm pretty sure they launched after Secret's NFT marketplace, right? If Secret had done well, why would Stargaze have nothing should have happened to Stargaze. But Stargaze was always really reliable. It always had a good user experience. And so people stayed there and they continue minting there. It continues usage. Stash, can't say the same.
Yeah, I never even heard of it. I just looked it up.
Well, I remember because there was the Tarantino NFT, right? Like this was like when was that on Stash?
Was that Stash?
That was on Stash. Yes, it was.
Oh, yeah. So like that was like huge news, and I remember thinking, oh shit, Secret's absolutely going to explode. It's going to be the only place for NFTs, because the ability to do these kind of like hidden metadata, and then you can share you can choose who can see it, and that kind of model for collective ownership of NFTs and stuff like that, and all of these really interesting things you can do when you have privacy. And then somehow it was a huge fumble, right? And but you land the single most iconic film director of all time, I would argue, and you don't make money. It's breathtaking. Yeah. And also to the point where they don't even they did one. I think he was signed up to two, and they just canned the second one because it didn't the bids weren't high enough, right? Like no one wanted it. That was not at a high enough price.
It sold for $1.5 million, if I remember correctly. So it's pretty decent, but
it's a lot of. But to be fair, he could have sold that at a real auction in real life for a lot more.
Yeah,
And
yeah, absolutely.
at the time, the NFT market was crazily overheated. And I suspect had there been an equivalent version on Ethereum, he'd have done 10 times that amount, right? Like, it's just that, it was a Cosmos
Or
chain.
more.
That wasn't great. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I think this is the problem is that, like, I think this is my fear about the bull market. It's like, are we really ready? And like, certainly one of the conversations that I had a lot during my stint at AADAO, which I do like to mention from time to time, was around bull market preparedness. It's like, who is producing the content that's going to help us onboard new users? Who is producing those guides? Who is producing these things? Who is providing the infrastructure? How are we abstracting away IBC so that when you decide you want to come into Cosmos, you don't have to figure out how the flip to get your tokens over these places? Like,
Yeah.
it's IBC is wonderful, but it is probably also our biggest barrier to adoption.
Yeah,
because people think of bridges in a completely different way to the way that IBC is. Universal gas tokens, right? Probably one of the more controversial takes in the interchain, because every chain will want their token to be the gas token because that's a use case, and awful user experience. So, wallets are working on this kind of thing. Some chains are doing bits. Osmosis has this bit that plugs into their DEX where you can pay with any token. I say we, but RoboMagobo got that onto the hub. We advocated for it, and basically we're like, yes, this is what everyone should be doing because it makes better user experience regardless of which DEX gets the volume. Because I think we got a bit of pushback, and they were like, it should be Astroport. It's like, Astroport need to build the code then. Like, I'm not waiting for perfect when it's about user experience. User experience just has to be better than it is today. And I hope, that that's what my ex-colleagues will continue to push for, is like better user experience and being user focused rather than being token focused. Like, allow the app developers, chain developers to worry about the tokenomics of what they're doing and things like that. Harder on the hub because there isn't anyone actually in charge. But in the wider area of Cosmos, my big thing is, if you're issuing grants, what you really, really need to be doing is pushing everyone to make UX better. And not just better than it is today, but better than it needs to be today, because in 3 months' time, you're not going to be able to ship the updates you need to catch up. Like, no one uses something in Web 2 and goes, oh, well, I'll come back to that in a few months once they've got it working. That product dies.
Right.
And like, no one's willing to sacrifice that to go and use a bigger, slower, less usable thing today. So why should that be the same in blockchain?
I totally agree. The Noble USD thing, the USDC experience has really surprised me. Not the experience, that's not rephrasing. How much has flowed into the ecosystem? I didn't realize that Cosmos's ecosystem was bigger than so many other ones, like Arbitrum, right? The fact that there's more native USDC in the Cosmos ecosystem right now than in almost every other completely floors me. And that's not even including, Axelar USDC, which is where most of the USDC still is. It's crazy to me, which means that we need to be, you're right, we need to be ready like 3 days ago.
Yeah. And like, the Noble team don't get half as much credit as what they should get. And, equally, the wider team that were involved in the onboarding of DYDX, because and this is where it's really interesting. DYDX are such a user experience focused team that they forced, if Cosmos wanted them, Cosmos had to up its user experience in order to make it happen. And that's fascinating to me, is that, like, if you want this golden, and that's when Cosmos learned that lesson, where you've got OGs suddenly turning their attention to these problems rather than worrying about particularly fancy forms of cryptography. Can't say it, too many Baileys. But it's just that thing where it's like getting back down to a user level and having a product that people really want and solving for that. It needs to drive stuff. I used Noble USDC properly to off ramp for the first time today, and it was bloody brilliant. Like, I just had a super seamless experience, lower fees on my centralized exchange than if I'd have had to bring Atom into there. So I saved myself a few pounds. So, you know, like, great from my point of view. And the few pence that it cost me in terms of some revenue to Noble, as the kind of, with the way that their routing works, didn't touch the sides compared to what I saved.
Oh yeah, versus bridge fees and those types of things. You mean? Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean,
or even if I'd have done it, even if I'd have just done it in Atom, right? Because that's how I used to have to do it, where I'd swap things to Atom and then I would just send, and then I would sell that token on the centralized exchange.
Right.
There's no selling cost to USDC on mine.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and even or transfer cost, even if it was coming out of the CEX, we might have some, and those types of things. But yeah, I know we always talked about, like, what's the new hub, and that idea of being able to bridge USDC without fees across any of these type structures is a huge fucking advantage. Huge, right? Like, it's a total walled garden situation where, like, people wouldn't like that. Like, I don't necessarily like it because it's very quote unquote centralized from a single chain and all that, or a single asset, and there's risk associated with that asset, and it puts in like false securities associated. I totally agree. But from a user experience perspective, it's fucking great. Right. So.
And I thought that, so their current business model, where they charge a few points on the IBC transfers, and they're all your, so even if you're moving your Noble from Osmosis to Neutron, it actually routes via Noble, and it charges you that way. You can't move directly, except that obviously you can, because IBC is permissionless. And it was interesting because I asked them this, and I was like, well, why would anyone pay you? And they were like, well, why wouldn't you? Ultimately, why would you go? Like, some decks eventually will set up a thing and it will just cut us out. Fine. But in terms of the network effects, you're going to have a different version of the token, all of those problems that we have with IBC in general. And I think that actually, when we talk about the hub, that's really what the hub should have been, is to go, all of these use case problems that we have with tokens are solved by routing, where you just route via another thing. So packet forward middleware and all of these things has been fantastic, because it means that this mess that IBC will become in its current model, if you have 10,000 IBC chains and everything has to talk to everything, that's just absolute chaos, right?
Yeah.
If you actually start to put more sensible structures in place, and you go, yeah, that's going to cost fractions of a token to move it, as an additional bit. There should be something in there for relays as well. Like that, it becomes a more obvious relay thing. And one of my frustrations is everyone goes, oh, well, that's not how it works. As if it working badly today means we shouldn't try to change it, or just go, you know what? Yeah, we're going to leave and support all of these old channels. They'll continue to work as they are. But if we genuinely believe there's going to be 10,000 chains, what does it matter what the first 50 or 100 did?
Right.
They're meaningless in terms of scale.
Right.
Like, it really, what precedent is nonsense here.
Right.
And we need to come up with structures that are more efficient and workable.
I'll push back a little bit here. I don't think the Cosmos could handle even the current amount of traffic that's in IBC, right? And that becomes such a liability, where if someone attacks Cosmos, you take down the entire, what would effectively become the economic zone. That puts a lot of fear in me. I think that the way we're currently doing it isn't awesome because of how convoluted it is. But if we only had one single hub that manages so much traffic,
But I think that you could have alternatives, right? Like, I'm not saying that you just have one. I think that you could totally have different hubs. That was the whole vision of the original model, right? But this is the thing: is IBC was designed to work with the original model, and then we haven't delivered the original model, but expect IBC to work. And that's my problem. Is like the hub should have done hub relaying, and I think it should still do that. But I also think that if you're Osmosis, you probably there's an argument for why wouldn't you do it? You're a DEX. Everyone's going to be moving their tokens in and out of you anyway. Just make it part of the feature you offer, right? Like, and then you can compete on price, and relayers can do different things, and you can actually create markets around this. And then you will decide what works and how we balance security risk against economics. So I'm not dismissing what you're saying, Schultzy, but I feel like what we're doing at the moment is we've done half of the step, and then we can't work out why it doesn't work, because what we've done is, as typically, we've done the hard technical bit, and then we've just given up, or we've moved on to the next interesting technical problem. And I think this is really what frustrates me at times in Cosmos. It's like, if it isn't a big, hard technical problem, there isn't a lot of interest in doing it. And I think that's where the reputation of Cosmos as being like super clever, great tech, no one actually uses it, comes from. Because actually a lot of the people solving for these problems, that is what they're not interested in, making the chains usable or having volume.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with that for sure. I've had several hour-plus long meetings with people trying to figure out like the best way you can unwind IBC transactions, just to kind of work around the horrible use case of the way IBC tokens function, right? If we had just done the hub system, then we would just know how things work. Well, that token is assigned here and came through here, done. Rather than, okay, well, it bounced around, and how are we going to handle that? And it would definitely handle a lot of overhead.
What's Josh from Kepler had this? It's on Twitter. People should look it up, or I might even try and find it, and I'll give it to Usurper to put in the show notes. He's got this really great explanation of why IBC works the way it does, in terms of, by having the paths that it's been on, you can know the trust assumptions behind that token. So if there's an exploit on a given chain within the IBC network, you could know if a token comes from somewhere where something dodgy's happened. So for example, let's say on a network, they suddenly come up with the ability to clone the tokens. Rather than the system being awash with forged coins, as it were, you can actually go, well, actually, we're just going to say all of these coins can't be trusted anymore. And you just pass a governance proposal that says it, and you can check it in the code, and it's there. And there's a kind of like, that ability to have that audit trail is really useful, because it gives you some additional security, but you lose usability because of it. And how that plays out over time will be really interesting, because what we haven't really seen is the need for that yet. We haven't had that kind of exploit in Cosmos thus far. I'm sure it will happen, where we get bogus tokens. But that's the kind of thing that the original thinking was designed to protect us from. And I think it's easy for Johnny-come-latelys like me to shit on people that did a lot of hard work and a lot of hard thinking early on and say, oh, you came up with something that doesn't work. So I will find the explanation from Josh, because it's really, really good, and people should read it, because if you're worried about the way IBC works, it will just challenge some of the assumptions you make about why is it so shit. Was there anything else Rama wanted us to talk about? I say Rama because, he's really in charge of the show now, right? That's the way that this has actually worked.
Well, he is the director.
Is he?
Would he be the producer? No.
God, I hope
I
not.
don't know.
No, don't say that.
I think technically he's only the researcher, but I feel like he exerts the authority of a producer.
No, we talked about all the Astroport and the kind of aping in every, as you said, aping into every goddamn token that exists on Astroport, which is probably right. And we talked about Levana a little bit. We talked about the node structure associated with those. Yeah, I don't know. Those are all the kind of current highlights, I think.
Well, should we move on to Christmas party kind of stuff? Like,
yeah,
I guess
that sounds amazing. If I can get, go ahead.
No, I wasn't sure whether there was, Schultzy had any sort of Christmas party games lined up, or his review of the year, his quiz that
Review
he's
of
prepared.
the year. Oh, review of the year. And I have to come up with this on the spot. Oh no. Can't do it. Not happening.
What 2020? What? Give me 20 words on 2023 for L5.
20 words on 2023 for L5. I don't know if this really counts, but I think that one thing I'm really proud of for this year is, there at one point there was 6 of us in Lavender 5, right?
Mhm.
And now there are 3. And one thing that was a crowning achievement of this year is having like clear verticals, having clear responsibilities. And early on, my philosophy as a leader was kind of like, hey, we're all part of this. This is a startup. If you want to work on a certain thing, then just work on that. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And I think that's a good idea in theory, but the more that we as a team have grown, the more I've learned that there's a lot to be said about just once someone has decided like what they want to work on, like you kind of declare that, like, okay, you've been working on this, you like working on this, this is your responsibility. Like, you own
Mhm.
it. If there's decisions, it's your decision to make, and I can help you decide on it or whatever, but this is your decision. And there's a lot of power to be had there. And I'm really proud that this year we've kind of reached the point where we now have our different ownership positions. I, of course, still kind of work in all of them because Lavender 5, kind of, I am the representation of it. But ultimately, everyone has a responsibility, and it makes this work so much smoother. If there's a question around nodes, then more often than not, people are going to go to James, because James is the one managing them a lot of the time. I write like the automation behind them, the monitoring, things like that. But James is the day-to-day. He knows them better. Like, I'm working on the software. Erdman's doing the business stuff. And things just work so smooth. It's so nice to just have that.
I think next year you should learn how to count to 20.
Well, so I was just kind of rounding a little bit. You know what I mean?
Just
If
rounding
you
up.
squint a little bit, it was 20.
That's good, man. It's tough to be able, especially in a small team and things like that. I think it's a tough business to kind of work out in terms of delegation and roles and responsibilities. Because it's not only just because you have a lot of repeatable pieces here in terms of knowledge, but there's a lot of intricacies within those chains, right? And obviously, you guys are getting involved in new things, and it's not just a cookie cutter thing over and over, which is tough. Plus, you have the time zone issues, right, and all other type of thing that fits into that, and just because somebody has expertise in something doesn't mean that they can be available to solve that problem, right? So you have a lot of overlapping of skill sets. It's a tough business to scale, to be honest. And I've always been like in the past, like where it's it's always, the comment was like every time that you double in terms of employees, that's really becomes like 1 to 2 is really hard, right? And 2 to 4 is hard, and then you get to 4 to 8 and things like that. And kind of getting into those groups, because everybody's kind of roles change, and you have a bunch of responsibilities change, and then obviously you guys are getting involved in more different things. So yeah, that's good. I'm glad you guys are getting to a groove with that.
It was tough. That doubling, it's true. Going from 1 to 2 doesn't sound like a big deal. Like 1 plus 1 is really simple. But
It's very
suddenly,
difficult.
like, it is, because before you just communicated with yourself, right? If there was
Mhm.
something that needed done, you knew that, well, I hadn't done it, therefore it needs doing.
Right.
However, going from 2 people, now there's a potential like outlier of, hey, I woke up at 6 a.m. and they're probably not even up yet, but sometimes they get up early. So, hey, I just have to message them and say, hey, like, did you already do this? Right.
Yeah.
We use Notion for that in order to track, what's been done.
Mhm.
But even that's now an extra piece of software that you have to have in mind to be like, hey, okay, now I need to check the tickets. Has the Zeta chain upgrade happened yet? Oh, I guess it has. I just checked the status of it. But that adds, let's say a minute overhead, and that adds up.
Without being flippant, was it harder to double in size or to halve in size?
It's a great question. I guess there's kind of 2 aspects of it, right? From an emotional perspective, it was far more difficult to half in size. Really, really tough. And now I operate way more conservatively. Yeah. But in terms of delegation of responsibilities, I'm far more discerning about what a hiring is for and what need it serves. And so it's kind of more stressful to double in size in that way, but emotionally far more stressful to have. Far more stressful.
Yeah, you're affecting people's lives. That's always tough, right? But taking on the responsibilities is usually easier. It's just that's different type of stress, right? Of
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. It's yeah. Gone through that
Yeah,
in our
because I
career
think
too.
I think that's what interests me. I mean, my experience of this year is very different, but this year for like you guys, from a viewer perspective, there were points in this year where, like, as a viewer, I just wanted to put my arm around you guys because you could see all sorts of things going on for different ones of you over the course of the bear. That's just like there were just some weeks where I was like, oh, I really don't even know that I want to tune in because the guys will be suffering. And like that, I still did tune in because I enjoy giving you shit in the chat. But like, it's that thing where yeah. But it's that thing where you kind of go, the reason that I always advocate that people should watch this show is because it really takes away the kind of moon boy culture. Because I think what Schultz describing there with that kind of having to try and figure out how to be responsible in terms of scaling up and scaling down, and how look, bull run's coming, probably going to scale up again, might need to scale down again in the bear. How you approach that this time around, you've got a bunch of experience in the bank, right? But I think that's where this kind of program's been really interesting, because it's like it's quite good for just talking about how you assess risk and how you manage that emotionally, because I think a lot of the assumption is, oh, well, you just hodl and you're diamond handed, and if you sell, you're weak or whatever. Like, there's loads of just all of this sort of Twitter nonsense versus the emotional reality of what this show has shown over this year. And I think that's probably my Game of Nodes thing, is that this year's been a pretty raw one in some ways, more raw than like Prop 16 and the chain halt and all of that kind of stuff, which felt like it happened live on the show, but it felt like it was good times. Whereas this year's just been like some really, really bleak weeks.
I think that's a totally valid take.
I think that's fair. Yeah, no, I would totally agree. I think that our 20 words this year, I think similar to I guess it allowed us to spend some more time on focusing on what's important versus trying to go after everything, which I think was really beneficial for us this year. And I think, Betty, your point is right. It focuses you on identifying where you're going to spend time and maybe what is the outcome of that, and then things that are in the past you kind of go after anything you could hopefully get, and now you be a little bit more, you're a little bit more cautious about those types of things. I thought we were incredibly lucky this year with some things, like, and that's what this business is, honestly. Like, there's a lot of experience in there, and there's a lot of that, and there's just a shitload of fucking luck in some things, right? And we were lucky last year, at the end of last year in 2022, and then some of that stuff carried over into this year, and we missed out on a bunch of shit too. So like anything else, like there's things that we ignored because we didn't think we were going to go anywhere, or we just didn't have time, or those types of things, and then they turn into something great that you're not a part of, and whatever, you move on, right? But yeah, I don't know. It's been a pretty raw year. I think especially on Game of Notes, like, to your point, like just talking about some of the challenges, and you gotta have a sense of humor around it too, because otherwise, like, what the hell? Can't sit there and like you gotta have a sense of humor, especially with people shit talking in the comments. That's like the best part. So
it was a weird year. It was a very strange year. I think the year started off really strong. And something about it felt like everyone started just getting worn down. And I can't even put my finger on why that is, because if I remember correctly, a lot of the market was down further at the beginning of the year than it is now, right? And so I don't know why. Like, what happened that caused such a bleak perspective for so many people?
I think just the
Was
time too, right? Like it just like it just builds because I mean it's really started what March of last year.
Yeah, so Terror was last year, right? That
Yeah,
was around
April
then, and
April
then
22 or something. Yeah.
but FTX was this year.
Mm,
So I think that that's kind of the thing is that you've had by the time you're at the end of Q1, Q2 this year, you've already had a year of almost perpetual black swan events.
right.
And then if you're me and you've cared about the Cosmos Hub, then you've had things like I think Prop 69 rejection, Prop 82 rejection, these big sort of like, from my point of view, just taking the wrong direction and not doing things, and a lot of division in the community, and it's all super draining every time you go through one of those. And and then like it feels like that we're on an upward curve at the moment, I would say sort of since November. Don't think that's got anything to do with anything particularly happening. It's almost like the absence of anything shit happening has just given people a bit of a relief.
Yeah.
And obviously there's the coming Bitcoin ETF and all of that stuff that's giving people a bit of hope in the future. So there's a bit more euphoria, and it makes things a bit easier to deal with because everyone's that little bit nicer. But I definitely find that uncomfortable. I realized a couple of weeks ago that I definitely preferred the bear market like I had got psychologically comfortable in that space.
Yeah.
And I felt far less comfortable with people making money and everyone's being nice. And, I was just like, what is this? I don't know where I stand anymore.
That I think is a
I was
really
used
good
to down
observation.
only.
That's funny.
Yeah, no, the bull market really brings a different level of stress, which I don't think a lot of people talk about. I mean, if we come full circle back to Game of Newts, I put in a couple $100 at the start, right? And I had more liquid that I could have put more into, right? And so I could have gotten more gains if I'd put more in. I typically don't think too much along that effect because, okay, whatever. But when the bull market starts hitting, that becomes really tough, really toxic. Like, hey, I know my friend talked about this 2 weeks ago and I should have done it. And I didn't. And I didn't for no reason. Right? I had no good reason why I didn't. But I'd be rich now if I had, bought Shiba, Inu, Doge, Obama, Calypso, whatever.
Right.
That's my minute story is that I basically had the flu over the weekend and was in bed, and it was nighttime my time, and I saw something in Telegram with someone saying, hey, this Newt token market cap 30k, and I was like, that's going to pop off. I can't be to use Astroport, I can't be in the UK, so I would have had to have left my bed. Plus you can't use it on your mobile. So I couldn't be bothered to get my laptop because I didn't want to get out of bed. And I could have made 100x, and that's like, there is a stress with that, right? Like I had a friend that was willing to give me a heads up. I didn't take an opportunity. They made some money. I didn't. Like, all of that stuff is stressful. It's more stressful than the slow grind down than I'd had, because I'd kind of priced that in, right? I was like, oh, well, it would just come back up when the bull happens, so I'm just going to hold. And I kind of, and I've made sensible decisions. And now what you have to do is like make completely crazy decisions and then figure out when you're meant to sell and when you're not, and all of this stuff. And like, so I think what I'll do over Christmas is I'm just going to write down some numbers on pieces of paper, and I'm going to stick to those, whether they're right or wrong, just so that I don't have to think when the time comes, because I can't trust my emotions. But it's like, so the Levana airdrop, I sold some of it, I LP'd some of it, I've held some of it in a kind of ratio that I think is conservative, because that's what I will do just to preserve my sanity, because I'm definitely not going to sit there and go, oh, if I'd have sold or hodled all of it or whatever. Like, you can be an absolute terror to yourself in this market. And, you haven't even started yet.
Yep. Another great example is Celestia. most of the Lavender 5 team sold the vast majority of our tokens like at $2. We were like, hey, we made profit. This is awesome. Like feeling good. And it crested $15 for a minute there, right? It's really easy to see that and be like, yeah, we're relayers. We could have, got to like really increase our emergency fund with that.
That thinking is why I own 1 billion Chihuahua.
Yeah.
Exactly why.
But Chihuahua's flying at the moment. You should be.
I know it is. It is.
You must be making bank now. It turns out that the key thing is to FOMO in,
is to ignore it
3 years, and
exactly
that's fine.
Ignore it. Yep. That's it. That's the plan. That's my long-term plan. Hold on it for 10 years. Forget about the wallet. Think about it later.
Just don't lose the keys. You'll become one of those people, right? Where it's like,
That's right.
There's this wallet and it's dead and it's in dormant, and then one day it'll be like, bang, back to life, and a whale alert will go off. I
do have Bitcoin somewhere. I know there's wallet keys on some sort of spinning hard drive that's in the cabinet behind me. I know there is. Because I remember minting it. I remember running it. It's probably dust, but I know it's on there. It's on there somewhere, which I'm never going to go look. Gone forever.
I've talked about this before, but I had like 20 Bitcoin that I used to trade with Diablo 2, and I got scammed out of some small amount, like a quarter of a Bitcoin or something at some point. And I just toasted the wallet. So somewhere in the reality is 20 Bitcoin just sitting there, because as a college student, I was like, screw this stupid token money. Isn't real. PayPal's not going to help me out. I'm out of here.
I'm out. I'm done. That's what they said. Like the amount of Bitcoin they thought is lost is like a huge percentage, right? Of outstanding. It's a massive number. Yeah.
Yeah.
One day that will be nuked too, because there's a finite amount of it. No more's coming.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right. That's right. Don't shill on here. Keep your fucking Newt talk out here. How's my Neta doing, by the way?
I think it hit like $40 recently.
Did it really? Get out of here.
I think so.
Where's that? Any of those sites still exist?
Golden ratio again. Apparently
sure.
Just made it. They
giant Neta holder. I'm sure.
They aped into it like 2 months ago, and were just like, if Juno goes up, surely Neta will pump at some point. So they probably own enough to like take all the liquidity at some point.
I do not. I mean, that guy, he's on top of it.
He really is. He calls each and every one, which makes you wonder, like at some point of his influence, do coins start becoming a thing because he's influencing them, or is he
who's influencing
who? Yeah, exactly.
As soon as intents are a thing, right? Like I just want to tell a contract just to copy trade him, just to be like, at like 1,000th of his size, because I don't have his money. But just to be like, because like he hits everything. It's amazing.
Yeah, there was yeah, that's what you need. You need that's an intent site. That's actually a good idea. Those exist in the market. Well, they used to exist in the market as well, where you could like, somebody would actually have a portfolio, right? And you would just mirror that portfolio, and then you would have a setup, and they would just mirror trades at the same exact time. That's what we should do. He could take 2% out of whatever crap coins I have in there. That's perfect. Let's do that.
This is another Game of Nodes product that isn't going to ship in 2024.
For sure, but we bring the ideas. I mean, that's a good idea. Those shirts are coming any day now, by the way. Almost there. We did actually. No, never mind. No, it doesn't matter. Why even bring it up? Doesn't even make a difference.
That's right.
Why not even say? Well, I literally was going to be like, oh yeah. By the way, on the shirts we have huge news. We do not have huge news.
No, we don't.
There's no huge news.
So really, that's the summary of the year. Another year, no Game of Nodes shirt.
Merry Christmas, everyone.